We now want to look at one of the key phases of consolidation of that frontier religion. We've talked about expansions of circuits and condensation of class meetings, societies on the circuits to create density. And one of the great transitional important pieces to consolidate the frontier religion and make it more a part of communities was the camp meeting. The camp meeting is a important stage in moving from circuits and class meetings as the locus or the site, center of gravity of Methodist religious practice. With the camp meetings, you were able to attract from wider circuits and classes and create regional connections over county-wide connections that really provided a consolidating factor which sets the stage really for the growth of Methodist station charges or congregations on the other side of this holy knock-em-down power religion that really consolidates the frontier and ties together circuits and classes in a wider regional network. This is an important transitional phase. Certainly from the 1820s and 1830s onward, the growing settlements of the American frontier were able to be tied together with enough wealth and cooperation and structural support to create congregational churches. The origins of the camp meeting, Methodists cannot count them as the origin, as the originating factor, but a number of Scottish Presbyterians who had immigrated from Scotland had already seen communion seasons celebrated in the wild in Scotland to bring together various groups into the wilderness to celebrate communion. And a number of Presbyterians began to preach in the open air as they immigrated to America. One, James McGreedy, a Presbyterian preacher, began preaching in Logan County, Kentucky around 1800. We're going to look at the map here of Logan County. In the Gasper River area, James McGreedy begins to preach out of this Scottish Presbyterian background. He is able to preach the new birth and is able to attract the McGee brothers, one of whom, John McGee, John McGee was a Methodist minister who then began to take the camp meeting format into Tennessee later in August of 1800. So we can see here that the Methodist appropriation of Scottish Presbyterian preaching just across the state line brings Methodism into Tennessee in a camp meeting format. About a year later, in August of 1801, the most famous of camp meetings was held, or early camp meetings, was held at Cane Ridge in Bourbon County, to the north and the east of present-day Lexington, in which, again, a leader named Barton Stone, who came out of the Scottish Reformed tradition, led this Cane Ridge revival. Some observers estimate somewhere between 10 to 30,000 hearers were there at Cane Ridge. Methodist lay preachers and other preachers were responsible also in connection with Barton Stone. The camp meeting and the success of Barton Stone's interpretation and organization, adaptation of it, ultimately led to the success of the Restorationist Disciples of Christ. And Barton Stone and those of his theological persuasion went in the direction of creating that denomination, the Disciples of Christ. But the Methodists thereafter, from 1801, began to employ camp meetings with ever greater intensity, which you see here. Francis Asbury, Richard Watcote, Bishop Watcote, and William McKendry. William McKendry, not yet a bishop, he's made a bishop in 1808, already began working on adapting the camp meeting to bringing together the circuits and the class meetings very early. So Methodists take over the movement, and the first real shift towards congregational support is built off of these countywide and regional gatherings. The camp meetings from about 1800 to 1850 really become a central feature of Methodist life, held together by Asbury's early and William McKendry's middle support for that work up until certainly to the 1840s. But the camp meetings were strong, a part of something called the Second Great Awakening from the early 1800s. And so structurally, the brush arbor, a clearing in which usually a stream was found, usually it was late in the summer. Once the harvest was already in, you could gather people from a wider region, and Methodists increasingly had the field, literally, the camp meeting field to themselves, as the Presbyterians tended to think it was not decent or in order. And you can see with people like Lorenzo Dow, the great camp meeting preacher of the early 1800s who preached across the U.S. and even in Great Britain, there was great frontier expressions of fervor and excitement and even chaos. If you go into a wilderness setting, you bring people who are isolated generally in their smaller communities. You bring them together over 3 to 4 nights where they're camping, vulnerable in the beautiful wilds, and you give them social opportunity and exciting preaching and repetitive, stimulating music. It led to an emotionalism that scholars have seen as some of the precursors to the modern day charismatic movement. Jerking and barking and feigning and deep trances, all of it built off the what youth ministers often have seen. If you bring vulnerable, impressionable young people into a camp setting or a outdoor setting, and give them social interactions and inspiring ideas and new stimulating music and concepts, it can create an emotionalism. And Lorenzo Dow spoke of how the spiritual effects affected really across all age, gender, and class spectrums. But you can see here in this plan from the 1809 Fairfax County, Virginia camp meeting that the tents were arranged in a semicircle. Here are the Negro or African American tents, and so with numerous stagecraft. So early American staging and rhetoric begins to take place. You can see here that large platforms are created and multiple sermons going on and multiple music, singings. Many of the African American hymnic tradition comes out of the after hours African American camp meeting preaching and worship after the whites had finished the evening. So Bishop William McKendry makes use of this great tool. Many people complained of the emotionalism. There were also social problems that emerged from the camp meetings with young people falling into temptations. It was not uncommon for rowdies to enter. The rowdies would come and try to find suitable young female partners and cause trouble. The old saying, Saturday night's all right for fighting, the old song by Elton John was certainly true. Saturday night during the camp meetings was often a night of great emotional power and not uncommonly physical brawling. It was also not uncommon for for persons to either smuggle in alcohol or to have it brought in for them, and so it was a best of times, worst of times scenario. Methodists tended to find, with their discipline, the ability to use it to their great benefit, and rode this second great awakening of bringing people together in camp meetings all the way into the 1840s, although the period of the most fervor was already done by, say, 1805. Most of the pre-charismatic manifestations were done by that time. So the camp meeting left deep impressions on Methodist worship as they began to adapt it for their own purposes. To bring some discipline to it, they were able to always bring that extemporaneous Methodist love of great preaching and singing. But the wilderness was tamed in many ways by the camp meetings, and the camp meeting itself was tamed by the Methodists, certainly by 1810. The camp meeting gave, as a part of a wider Second Great Awakening from 1790 to 1830, fostered some ecumenical partnerships. It also set the stage for tying together the circuits and the classes together, providing networks for the church to create more sacramental opportunities. The camp meeting was often held in conjunction with the quarterly meetings in which people would come to camp meeting to get their sacraments. Presiding elders would come, and you could build more sacramental possibilities there in the camp meeting. And of course, the most adept at preaching would always call Methodists back to their classes if they had found conversion. And the preaching really focused on conversion, less on the Wesleyan notion of personal holiness leading to social holiness. It really flattened out, the camp meeting did, the Wesleyan dialectic holding together personal holiness and social transformation. It lent itself to interior pietistic preaching, which did not lend itself to prophetic critiques, particularly of slavery at the time. The legalism of the preaching and the focus on conversion left Methodism less able to prophetically identify the Wesleyan ideals of anti-slavery with the proliferation of slavery in America at the time. Social reform was not on the agenda of the camp meeting. The proliferation of the camp meeting is clear. The ability to address people's emotions with stirring rhetoric and song and organization in a 3 or 4 day conference setting, providing sacraments. This, many scholars have indicated, has led to the kind of public discourse that inflames emotions that has shifted over and have been adapted by political parties and conferences. Rock and roll revivals often use techniques first developed in the camp meeting. You can see the wide proliferation of camp meetings in my book throughout the eastern seaboard, not simply in the south, but all the way into the northeast as well. We don't think of the camp meeting as anything other than a southern piece. But Methodists found that each circuit and each class needed to be connected with it, and as I've indicated, by the 1820s, 1,000 were being held a year. Many conferences, such as the Philadelphia Conference, required every circuit to hold a camp meeting each year. It left a deep, lasting impression on religious practices, political rhetoric, and even public performance to this day through the way we speak and sing and gather together using emotional even political campaigning has taken a bite from the success of the camp meeting. The Methodist Church grew into a more church-based organization in the aftermath of the camp meeting.